Under usual circumstances, we would see patients roughly every 3 months, perhaps every 6 months if they were doing particularly well. And on rare occasions, you could drift out even further than that. Certain of the medicines that we use require laboratory monitoring. And so some of those patients may need laboratory testing every 3 months under normal circumstances. But it's important to understand that these are not normal circumstances. And so the typical rules that we've used for when we bring patients in have really changed now. And what we'd say is that if you're still seeing patients on an in-person basis, then those routine follow-ups are typically being deferred. That is, that those appointments are being canceled and rescheduled for some point out in the future, because the threat to those patients of coming into the clinic is more significant than the threat to them if they've been stable, if their disease is well controlled, if they've been on the medications for a period of time, and if they're feeling well. So we're screening the list of patients that are coming in, not just for signs of or symptoms of COVID disease, COVID-19 infection, but also as to whether those patients really need to come in. And some of that can be done by the disease state. So for instance, those with osteoporosis or osteoarthritis tend to demographically be in a group of high-risk patients. And they also tend to be in a scenario where we can safely defer their visits for a period of time. Now, it's not ideal to do so in that those patients may be in pain, they may need monitoring, they may need changes to their regimen, but the general perception has been that the risk to them of coming in is greater than the benefit achieved by a routine follow-up. So those patients can be deferred. Similarly, for patients with fibromyalgia, although they're suffering terribly with their pain typically, the negative impact of deferring that visit is thought to be less significant than the risk to those patients. So already we've limited the number of patients. As I've said, those with stable rheumatoid arthritis who are doing well, stable lupus who are doing well, again, because of their high risk, we'd rather not bring them to a high traffic area where they have increased risk of exposure. So those patients are being deferred. So it requires a different calculus to determine who needs to come in and when. It's also possible, for instance, in certain circumstances, that folks could come in and get a blood draw done to make sure that they're not having toxicity from their medicines, but not have a face-to-face visit. And then a telemedicine visit can follow to discuss their results. And that way we've limited their exposures to some extent. So it really is a new world out there. And, my concern is that if the pandemic spreads across the country and the prevalence of disease is recognized to get greater and greater, that what we're going to have is fewer and fewer offices that are going to be seeing patients on a face-to-face basis in person. And we're going to have to transition almost entirely to telemedicine, which is not ideal, but it's a necessary circumstance at this point. And I think rheumatologists in general have been slow to adopt telemedicine. And the reason is that we've valued the physical examination, for instance, to tell the difference between a tender and swollen joint. But we've now come to the time where we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And we have to surrender those qualms that we've had about telemedicine in order to protect our patients who, as we've discussed, are often immunocompromised and at particular risk from being exposed to high traffic environments.